to help amplify other women, especially their voices within podcasting, right? And so I took on, I would say maybe about 5 other podcasters who already had existing shows to help them grow their show, amplify their voices, really hone in on their message, and give them some behind the scene tools on how to navigate this space, some things that I had learned. And I quickly realized that although that was a fulfilling way to approach this work, it was also very challenging because what people recognize and realize now about podcasting, especially advertisers, is that sometimes it's really hard to get people to be consistent. You can
Yep.
get them to be consistent for a period of time, but just by nature, sometimes we're a little flip-floppy. Sometimes we're really interested in doing something and we do it, and then we fall off. And then we come back to it and we're going hard and then we fall off. And that's just the ebbs and flows of how people operate sometimes. And so that started to come into play with my podcasters. And I just quickly realized, hey, you can't control other people, especially if they aren't incentivized by money. And so it would have been different if I treated it as a record label where I gave them an upfront, what am I trying to say? Stipend of money. If I gave them an upfront of money, then that pays for their time and their effort and energy in producing their show. But I wasn't in a position to do that. And so when you're depending solely on advertising revenue and you're trying to grow, sometimes it's hard to have the patience to grow to be able to get to the place where you generate the ad revenue that really makes you feel like, okay, this feels like the job now. So it was a little challenging from that side. And I had to make a decision. Like, I also started to feel a little overwhelmed from the side of, or from the sense of keeping up with all these podcasters and who was doing
Yeah.
what when and whose show needed this or that. And so I had a decision to make in terms of what type of business model I wanted to engage with and employ moving forward. And I just didn't think that that was sustainable from the way that I was operating it at that point. And so that's when I made the decision to say, okay, I need to reevaluate some things and really maybe go in a direction that allows me to be able to get the capital so that I can invest in the things that I believe in, the stories that I believe in, and push those forward versus trying to take something that somebody else has already started and push that forward.
Yeah,
And
like you said, oh, I'm sorry.
no, I was just going to say, and unfortunately, the train just kept moving. And so at this point, I haven't been able to really create anything that I really want to create, but the time is coming. The time is coming.
Nice. Well, when you, and you touched on the fact that you were essentially helping other people who were starting their either side hustle or their own business try to scale up. So you were taking on essentially their responsibilities, their monetization. You're taking on the growth of their company, the scaling of their company, or again, their side business or little side hustle.
Yeah.
But at the same time, trying to grow your own. And that can be really taxing, things that people may not know in the podcast industry. If you miss an ad, like say you didn't put out an episode this week and you're supposed to have an ad, now you have to do what's called a make good. So now you have to communicate between the two different parties and figure out a new date that works. Maybe there's new copy that has to come along. And then you also still have to hope that that person actually records this time around. And so, yeah, that can get really cumbersome. So it might sound super easy. Hey, I just record my show and put it out there. But there's a lot of extra work that goes into it. And then also just, how you're marketing the show and trying to grow your audience. If you're creating a network, you want to help those podcasters grow at the same time. So you are taking on a lot of work, even if it is just 5 additional shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're also, when you're talking about the advertising and not just the make good, you're also dealing with the fact that, people want reliable people. And so if you did not deliver when you said that you were going to deliver, what's their incentive to continue working with you, And it's not then just a reflection of the host who didn't deliver. It's a reflection of you and your company because you didn't get your host to deliver, And so all these things have a ripple effect and one thing impacts another. And it can be a lot when you have multiple situations happening at the same time. So yeah, it's challenging, but I also learned a lot from that experience.
Yeah. Well, and you know, you mentioned too of you know, trying to I guess balance all that. You know, you mentioned in that a lot of these podcasters kind of get what we call in the industry podfade, where they, you know, it's really this new shiny thing. I have all this time, I have all this energy to put into it, but eventually a week, you know, 2 weeks go by, 3 weeks, you get a few months in, all of a sudden it's not new and shiny, or, you know, now it just feels like a job as opposed to this exciting, you know, hobby that you were doing. And so you can get exhausted. And so that also is on your side as a creator of podcasts, but also running a company. So, you know, Cammie here in our Fireside audience, and for those of you who are on YouTube watching us, if you are able to come over to us on Fireside, you're able to ask questions. Cammie wrote one here for us. So, Cammie, if I don't get this correct, you know, feel free to raise your hand and jump on stage to ask it correctly, or, you know, just type in a new question or kind of update and kind of fix how I'm asking this here. But essentially, I think she's asking a question around podfade. She wants to know, how do we stay in the flow when starting a podcast? So essentially, like, yeah, how do you not get in the podfade? How do you keep up that consistency is how I interpret that.
So I think number one, you have to be realistic with yourself, and you have to manage your own expectations of yourself. And maybe even before that is figuring out why you're doing it. Because podcasting feels very glittery and shiny right now, because a lot of people are thinking, oh, there's people getting good success and traction and media attention and book deals and movie deals or production deals. And all these different great things are coming from their podcasting journey. So maybe I should get into podcasting and see what it can do for me. And although that's not a bad thing, I think your drive and your reasoning for entering the podcasting landscape should be more connected to the work that you're doing and more connected to a why that you specifically have. So for me, I wanted to create, when I first started, I started off with creating my own podcast, right? That's how I got into the space. And by creating my own podcast, what I wanted to do was have the conversations that I would have wanted to listen to, or that I thought would have been helpful when I was looking to transition from my corporate position into the next phase of my life, whatever that was going to look like. And so for me, my drive with podcasting and putting out episodes once a week, twice a week, was that I wanted to serve the community and the people that I knew needed this information because they were in a similar position that I was in. And so that was what pushed me forward. There wasn't a time where I was just like, you know, I don't want to do this and they don't need this week or what have you. If I ever started feeling like that, that was when I needed to stop doing the show. I didn't start having feelings like that until 4 years in, because I felt like, okay, we've talked about this at length at this point. There's enough content for people to go back to and pull from. So I feel like I can leave this conversation now feeling like I've contributed enough to this conversation to do some good for people who are coming after me and experiencing these feelings. So I think, to answer your question, there is no like right or wrong answer with it. And there's no one answer for any person. I think the best thing that you could do is just get connected to why you're doing it. And if you're extremely connected to why you're doing it, and it has nothing to do with money, it has nothing to do with notoriety, it has nothing to do with social clout or any of those things, then I think it's a little bit easier for you to stay connected to it week to week and produce. Because there's also all these different types of shows. I was listening to a podcast and it was done by a journalist, and she was basically saying, I'm doing this in real time. So while I may not have all these compelling updates for you week after week, I will still have something for you because I'm a journalist and I'm doing my job at the end of the day. So I'm going to bring you something, you know? And so I think being connected to something a little bit larger in terms of your purpose for why you're putting that content out there will help to keep you going longer.
No, that makes tons of sense. And yeah, having that mission, that mission-driven work can really help sustain you. But that's something that even when I talk to major podcast companies, I'll talk to some of the people who are onboarding new shows. One of the first questions that they ask people is, why are you doing it? And if the response is, I'm doing it for money, then a lot of times they'll tell me, they're like, okay, we're not the place for you. Yes, we want to make you money because that makes us money too. But if that's what you're doing it for, that usually is an indicator that they're going to get that pod fade. They're going to eventually get exhausted from it, or they're going to find a bigger check somewhere else, and they're going to put their time into that and let this thing fall by the wayside. So I think those are all really excellent points.